Why were Vikings so feared? Imagine you're asleep in a small village on the coast of England. The sun hasn't risen yet. Everything is quiet. Then, you hear something strange. Not voices, not horses. Just the steady sound of wooden oars cutting through the water. At first, nobody pays attention. But within minutes, dark ships begin appearing through the morning mist. Their carved dragon heads seem to stare directly at the shore. The boats move faster than anything you've ever seen. Before anyone can organize a defense, they're already here. Men carrying axes leap onto the beach. Homes catch fire. The church is looted. And just as quickly as they arrived, they're gone. The attack lasts less than an hour, but the story of what happened spreads across Europe for decades. These were the Vikings. For hundreds of years, just hearing their name filled entire kingdoms with fear. But here's the surprising part. It wasn't because they were stronger than everyone else. In fact, most Vikings looked surprisingly ordinary. They weren't giants. They didn't wear horned helmets. And they certainly weren't fearless monsters who only lived for war. So why did they become one of the most feared groups in history? The answer has less to do with muscles, and far more to do with psychology. Most armies of the time fought in predictable ways. Kings declared war. Armies gathered. Battles happened in open fields. Everyone knew when a war had begun. The Vikings completely ignored those rules. They didn't wait. They didn't announce themselves. They appeared when nobody expected them. One day, your village was peaceful. The next day, it no longer existed. That uncertainty terrified people more than the battles themselves. Humans fear the unknown, and no one represented the unknown better than the Vikings. But how could relatively small groups of warriors terrorize entire countries? The answer was floating on the water, their ships. The Viking longship was one of the greatest engineering achievements of its time. It was long, light, flexible, fast. It could survive rough oceans, but it could also sail through surprisingly shallow rivers. That meant Vikings weren't limited to attacking coastal towns. They could travel deep inland. Villages that believed they were perfectly safe suddenly found Viking ships appearing right outside their homes. No walls, no castles, no warning. Imagine living hundreds of kilometers away from the sea. You'd never expect enemy ships to reach your village. Then one morning, they do. That psychological shock was devastating. But their ships weren't the only advantage. The Vikings also understood something many armies ignored. Speed beats size. Instead of bringing thousands of soldiers, they often attacked with relatively small groups. Their goal wasn't conquering territory immediately. It was striking quickly, taking valuables, capturing supplies, and disappearing before larger armies could respond. By the time defenders organized themselves, the Vikings were already sailing home over and over again. This created an illusion that they were everywhere. Stories spread faster than the Vikings themselves. One successful raid became 10 stories. 10 stories became 100. Soon, entire kingdoms imagined Vikings as unstoppable forces of nature. Fear became their greatest weapon, and fear spreads faster than fire. Many people also imagine Vikings as wild, chaotic fighters. Hollywood often shows them screaming wildly into battle. The reality was far more disciplined. Vikings trained together. They relied heavily on teamwork. One of their most effective tactics was the shield wall. Each warrior protected not only himself, but also the person standing beside him. Instead of fighting as individuals, they fought as one moving wall. Breaking that formation was incredibly difficult. This discipline made relatively small Viking forces surprisingly effective against much larger armies. Then there's one of history's biggest myths, the horned helmet. Almost every movie gives Vikings giant horns on their helmets. There's just one problem. Real Vikings almost certainly didn't wear them in battle. Horns would make helmets heavier, easier to grab, and much less practical during combat. The famous horned Viking image was largely created centuries later by artists and costume designers. Sometimes history is less dramatic than the legend, but sometimes the truth is even more impressive. Another question has puzzled historians for years. Why did Vikings attack monasteries so often? Were they trying to destroy Christianity? Not exactly. The answer was much simpler. Money. Monasteries held gold, silver, jewels, books decorated with precious metals, and, perhaps most importantly, they were lightly defended. For the Vikings, monasteries were simply valuable targets with almost no protection. It wasn't personal, it was practical. One of the most famous examples happened in 793 AD, the monastery of Lindisfarne. The raid shocked Christian Europe, not because it was the biggest attack, but because it targeted one of the holiest places in England. To many people, it felt almost unimaginable, if even sacred places weren't safe. What was? That single attack changed Europe's perception of the Vikings forever. Sometimes one event is enough to create a legend, but despite their reputation, Vikings weren't only warriors. Most were actually farmers, fishermen, blacksmiths, merchants. They raised families, built homes, traded across Europe and the Middle East. Some even reached North America nearly 5 centuries before Columbus. Their society was far more advanced than many people realize. The warrior image became famous because that's what frightened Europe. But it wasn't the whole story, and perhaps that's the biggest lesson. History often remembers the loudest moments, not the most common ones. The Vikings weren't feared because they were the strongest people alive. They were feared because they understood surprise, speed, reputation, technology, and human psychology. They knew that sometimes the fear of an attack is more powerful than the attack itself. Long after their ships disappeared over the horizon, the fear they left behind remained, and in